2 weeks later, Meadowbrook Estates had become the most musically synchronized neighborhood in the city. Mike's system had evolved into a complex network that responded to everything from garbage trucks to hairdryers, creating an unintentional symphony of suburban life set to classic rock. Karen sat in her living room, surrounded by spreadsheets, legal documents, and 17 different noise-measuring devices she'd ordered online. Her lawyer had laughed her out of his office. The city council had politely declined to intervene in creative property maintenance solutions. Even her mother had stopped returning her calls after Karen spent 2 hours explaining her acoustic evidence against Mike's sonic terrorism. The doorbell rang, and Karen opened it to find Mrs. Chen, the Johnsons, and half the neighborhood standing on her porch. Her heart leaped. Finally, allies in her righteous crusade against Mike's musical madness. Karen, Mrs. Chen began gently, "We need to talk." They filed into her living room, carefully stepping around the towers of HOA documentation and noise monitoring equipment. Karen had transformed her home into a command center for suburban warfare. "I know why you're here," Karen said, gesturing toward Mike's house. "That man has turned our peaceful neighborhood into a war zone. But I have a plan. I've calculated the optimal placement for counterspeakers, and if we pool our resources—" "Karen, stop." The firmness in elderly Mr. Johnson's voice caught her off guard. "We're not here to help you fight Mike. We're here to ask you to stop." The words hit her like a physical blow. Stop. Stop protecting our property values. Stop enforcing the rules that keep this neighborhood civilized. "Karen," Mrs. Chen said softly, "do you know what happened before you moved here?" Karen blinked. She'd been so focused on establishing order, she'd never asked about the neighborhood's history. "Mike's wife died 3 years ago," Mrs. Chen continued. "Cancer. He barely left his house for months. We were worried about him. Then he started working on his driveway. Small projects at first, just to keep busy. It was healing for him." Karen felt something cold settle in her stomach. I didn't know he was widowed. His morning routine, cleaning, maintaining his property. It's how he copes," Mr. Johnson added. "When you came after him with your noise complaints, you attacked the one thing helping him get through each day." Karen looked around at their faces. There was no anger, just disappointment. "But the rules. The rules were supposed to help us live together peacefully," Mrs. Chen said. "Not give anyone a weapon to use against their neighbors." Through the window, they could see Mike in his driveway, methodically cleaning his tools. The massive speakers sat silent. He'd actually been turning them off whenever Karen wasn't around to provoke. "So what? I'm supposed to just let people do whatever they want." Karen's voice was small now, stripped of its usual righteous fury. "You're supposed to remember that we're all neighbors first," Mr. Johnson said. "Rules serve community, not the other way around." After they left, Karen sat alone in her fortress of grievances. She picked up one of her noise meters, remembering the thrill she'd felt the first time she'd caught a violation. When had helping her community turned into hunting her neighbors? Her phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband. "Kids want to visit this weekend. Is your new place still available?" Karen looked around at her home, every surface covered with evidence of her crusade against suburban imperfection. When had she become this person? When had protecting property values become more important than building relationships? She walked to her window and watched Mike carefully coiling a garden hose, his movements precise and meditative. For the first time, she noticed how thin he'd gotten, how his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. Karen grabbed her largest noise meter and walked outside, her fuzzy slippers crunching on the fallen leaves. Mike looked up as she approached, his hand moving instinctively toward his speaker remote. "Mike," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology." He studied her face, noting the absence of her usual aggressive stance. "Karen, I didn't know about your wife. About why you—" She gestured helplessly at his immaculate driveway. "I'm sorry." Mike's hand fell away from the remote. "She used to help me with weekend projects. Said it was our time to talk without the TV or phones. I guess I just kept the tradition going." Karen Whitmore's manicured hand trembled as she clutched her noise meter, watching the digital display spike to 78 decibels. Across the street, Mike Rodriguez was power washing his driveway at 7:03 a.m., 3 minutes past the HOA's designated quiet hours. "This is it," she whispered to herself, fumbling for her phone to record evidence. "This is my moment." The irony wasn't lost on her neighbors that Karen had spent $200 on a professional-grade sound meter, but refused to buy noise-canceling headphones. She'd appointed herself the unofficial noise enforcement officer of Meadowbrook Estates 6 months ago, after the board had politely declined her application for an official position. "Mike!" she shrieked across the street, her voice cutting through the morning air like a rusty chainsaw. "That pressure washer is a violate 12.3. Ah." Mike looked up, soap suds dripping from his driveway. At 62, he'd survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and 20 years as a construction foreman. Karen Whitmore in her pink bathrobe wielding a decibel meter didn't exactly strike fear into his heart. "Morning, Karen," he called back, not bothering to turn off the machine. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Karen's eye twitched. She marched across the street in her fuzzy slippers, noise meter thrust forward like a weapon. "This device is reading 78 decibels. The HOA covenant clearly states that excessive noise before 7:00 a.m. constitutes." "It's after 7, Mike interrupted, checking his watch. 7:03. You started at 6:58. I have video evidence." Mike studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly. Karen had been spiraling since her divorce 6 months ago, channeling all her control issues into HOA enforcement. The neighborhood had started taking bets on which poor soul would be her next target. "Karen, it's Saturday morning. People clean their driveways on Saturday morning. It's what normal people do." "Normal people," she spat, "follow the rules. Normal people don't wake up the entire neighborhood with industrial equipment." "Industrial equipment." Mike laughed, gesturing at his modest electric pressure washer. "Karen, this thing's quieter than your leaf blower." That was a mistake. Karen's face flushed crimson. She received 3 noise complaints about her weekly leaf-blowing sessions, all mysteriously filed right after she'd issued citations to other neighbors. "My leaf blower is battery-operated and falls within acceptable decibel limits," she said through gritted teeth. "Unlike your sonic assault device." Mike glanced around at the growing audience. Mrs. Chen was pretending to water her already soaked flower bed, while the Johnsons had mysteriously decided this was the perfect time to retrieve their morning paper. Karen seemed oblivious to the spectacle she was creating. "You know what, Karen? You're right." Mike's voice took on a dangerous edge. "This driveway is way too loud. I should probably invest in some proper equipment. Maybe something with a little more impact." Karen blinked, unsure if she'd won or walked into a trap. "Well, good. I'm glad we understand each other." "Oh, we understand each other perfectly." Mike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for the suggestion." As Karen strutted back to her house in triumph, she missed the calculating look in Mike's eyes and the way several neighbors were now openly grinning. She'd just declared war on the wrong veteran, and Mike Rodriguez had never been one to back down from a fight. Karen looked down at the noise meter in her hands, then set it gently on the ground between them. Maybe I could learn to appreciate a quieter approach to community involvement." Mike almost smiled. Maybe we both could. As they stood there in the growing dusk, neither noticed the small crowd of neighbors watching from various windows, or the way Mrs. Chen was already planning a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the armistice. But they both heard the gentle hum as Mike's speakers powered down for good, leaving only the peaceful sounds of evening settling over Meadowbrook Estates. Karen had finally found the quiet she'd been looking for. She just hadn't expected to find it in surrender rather than victory. 3 days later, Karen was jolted awake by what felt like an earthquake. Her windows rattled, her coffee mug danced across the nightstand, and somewhere in the chaos, she could swear she heard the opening bass line of "Welcome to the Jungle." She stumbled to her window and peered through the blinds. Mike's driveway had been transformed into something that looked like a NASA launch pad crossed with a music festival. Massive speakers, each the size of a refrigerator, were positioned strategically around his property. Mike himself stood in the center of it all, wearing safety goggles and holding what appeared to be a remote control. Karen grabbed her noise meter with shaking hands. The display immediately maxed out at 130 decibels. Mike Rodriguez, she screamed, though her voice was completely swallowed by the thunderous sound system. She banged on her window, jumped up and down, and finally gave up and called the police. 20 minutes later, Officer Jenny Martinez arrived, parking her cruiser a full block away to avoid the acoustic assault. She found Mike calmly adjusting settings on a professional mixing board that had definitely not been there yesterday. "Sir, we've received a noise complaint," Officer Martinez shouted over the music. Mike immediately hit a button, and blissful silence fell over the neighborhood. "Noise complaint? From who?" "I think you know who," Martinez said dryly, watching Karen march across the street in her bathrobe for the second time this week. "Officer, thank goodness you're here." Karen clutched her noise meter like a holy relic. "This man has installed some kind of sonic weapon system. Look at these readings. 130 decibels. That's airplane takeoff levels." Mike pulled out his phone and showed the officer a timestamp. "According to my records, I started at exactly 7:00 am. That's within HOA guidelines for acceptable noise hours. I'm just cleaning my driveway." "Cleaning your driveway?" Karen's voice cracked. "With what? A rocket engine?" "Industrial pressure washer," Mike said innocently. "You suggested I upgrade to proper equipment. I took your advice." Officer Martinez looked between them, clearly trying not to laugh. In her 5 years on the force, domestic noise disputes were usually about barking dogs or loud music. This was her first case involving weaponized home improvement. "Mr. Rodriguez, while you're technically within your rights regarding noise ordinances, this seems excessive." "Ma'am, I'm a veteran on a fixed income. This is the most cost-effective way to maintain my property. Karen here is always talking about property values. I'm just trying to keep mine up to her standards." Karen sputtered. "This isn't about property values. This is about psychological warfare." "Psychological warfare?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "Karen, I'm just following the HOA guidelines you're always quoting. Section 12.3 allows for maintenance activities during designated hours. It doesn't specify decibel limits for the equipment used." Officer Martinez could see this was about to spiral. "Look, folks, technically no laws are being broken here, but maybe we can find a compromise." "No compromise," Karen snapped. "I'm the head of the HOA Noise Committee. You appointed yourself to that position," Mike pointed out. "And it's not even a real committee." Karen's face went purple. "I'll have you know I filed 17 noise violations this month alone. I keep detailed records. I have charts." 17 violations, Mike repeated slowly. "Karen, there are only 12 houses on the street." The math hung in the air like a smoking gun. Even Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. Karen realized she'd just admitted to harassment, but she was too deep in to back down now. I patrol the entire neighborhood," she stammered. "I'm protecting our property values from people who think rules don't apply to them." Mike hit a button on his remote, and the speakers came back to life with a gentle hum. "Well then, Karen, you'll appreciate that I've programmed this system to activate automatically whenever anyone uses outdoor equipment louder than 50 decibels within a 3-block radius. It's motion activated and sound responsive. I call it the Neighborhood Harmony Initiative." Karen's mouth fell open. "You can't do that." "Actually," Mike smiled, "according to the HOA bylaws you had us all memorize, I can install any security or property maintenance system I deem necessary." This is both. As if on cue, someone 3 streets over started their lawnmower, and Mike's system responded with a perfectly timed blast of Eye of the Tiger. Karen watched in horror as her carefully ordered world descended into chaos, not realizing that her war on noise had just triggered an arms race she was destined to lose.